Let's review. We want to do a lot of reviewing here in these first 2 or 3 weeks, especially because if we don't lay this foundation right, if you don't learn the alphabet, it has all kinds of effects. Because what you want to do is to be able to read the Hebrew aloud, even if you don't understand the vocabulary. So that we want to get to that place where you're reading fluently, easily, so that the words come to you easily, you pronounce the vocabulary correctly, and you begin to note patterns, and it doesn't slow you down later then as we begin to put words with grammatical concepts, as we begin to put sentences together. We don't want you still back there working on the phonetics of the situation. So let's go over the alphabet again. The first letter is? Aleph. Second?
Wow, Zion, Hey, Day, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Hey, Side, Kof, Resh, Shin, Tau.
All right, so you've got them well. I heard you all pronounce them pretty much in unison. I couldn't tell if maybe a couple of you may have been sitting there silent, but I'll catch that eventually as we go along. But this is where we want you to be. We want you to be able to do these things as we're looking at them. And then let's go to, again, a review of some of the special consonants or characters. First of all, what we call the gutturals or the throaty five. These have special rules for them. They refuse the doubling dogish, which is the dogish forte. They prefer A-class vowels like the pathek, like the comets, like the hatif pathek and the hatif comets. They prefer A-class vowels, and they prefer compound schwa. In those situations where a half vowel is needed, they prefer a compound schwa. So they will take a compound schwa. Even if it's a hatif segol, they will prefer that rather than having a schwa. Now, the one thing that I mentioned before, and I want to emphasize again, the one of these five that is a maybe, that is only sometimes behaving like a guttural, is that last one, the resh. Because resh can be doubled. Resh can take a simple schwa rather than a compound schwa. And you'll find many situations in which resh does not appear to require or desire an A-class vowel. But all the grammars include it because it does behave that way from time to time. But the first four, you have to count on them almost always dealing that way. Now, one rule you're going to learn in Hebrew is that for every rule there is an exception, including that one. There may be a rule that doesn't have exceptions, but there are some that do have exceptions. So, for example, the chayth later we'll find some exceptions for. But that's language. Language is not always consistent. It varies. Remember, the silent letters are the aleph, the hey, the waw, and the yod, and also the ayin can be used as a silent letter. One of the reasons it's not included in here is that a majority of Hebrew grammarians believe that the ayin had some sort of sound associated with it that has been lost, and there's a debate as to how it should be pronounced. And whether it's just a closing of the throat, g, like that, or, you know, like in Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's why we have a G transliterating the name. Exactly how that works and when it works is still a very debated item. Why we don't have any surviving, living, breathing biblical Hebrew speakers from before 400 BC. So it's hard to know these things. The vowel letters, the hey, the waw, and the yod. In ancient Hebrew, these letters took the place of vowels. So, for example, at Qumran, when the manuscripts have no vowel pointings, the vowels are added by the Masoretes starting about AD 500. Then how are the vowels indicated for words that need the variation to be given so that you can understand which word is intended? They used the vowel letters. We'll be talking a lot about that as we go along from time to time and mentioning it. The labials, the beth, the mem, and the pei, where the lips are utilized in pronunciation, are important for us to remember because of the fact that there are special rules that will follow this later on as we go through Hebrew and begin to build words and put constructions together. The labials have a special way that they're treated. So beth, mem, and pei, keep in mind, are the labial letters. But Gad Kaphath letters, remember, are those letters that can take a dogish lene, the hardening dogish, in their bosom to give them a slightly different sound. Sometimes that sound is hard to distinguish to our ears, and so we can't see it. The beth is the easiest one to see because it's a B sound if you have the dogish. It's a V sound if you don't have the dogish. And the pei the same way. It's a P sound if you have the dogish. It's an F or a PH sound if you have no dogish. Here. The dogish lene is the name of that dogish then that goes in the bosom of Begad Kaphath letters. Begad Kaphath is just a contrived name of this group that is made up of those letters as a memory device, a mnemonic device. The dogish forte is the doubling dogish. The doubling dogish. That's when the consonant is doubled. So that in the word here, shim, meir, there are two mems that must be pronounced. And how do we know that the dogish is doubled in the mem? It is not a Begad Kaphath letter. Therefore, it is not a hardening dogish. So it will be a doubling dogish. Remember the consonantal text of Hebrew, as you see the ancient Hebrew written here, and you can also see that the script used for ancient Hebrew is different than the script we use for reading the Hebrew Bible. Why don't we learn this Hebrew script? Well, you will learn this in OT 603, third semester. You also learn it, it's gone over again in OTI, Old Testament Introduction, in OT 796, so that you have that knowledge. But our Bibles are not written with that script, and the purpose of learning biblical Hebrew is to be able to read our Hebrew Bibles. And that change took place after the Babylonian exile, when the Jews returned from Babylon and used the Aramaic script in place of the ancient Hebrew script for writing. But notice that there are no vowels here, no vowel pointings anywhere. Here we have Beit David, the house of David. Here we have Yisrael, Israel. We know that. We can read it without the vowels, and we have to understand that's the way Hebrew was written. And so as we go through the text, we want to actually get you to a point where you're not heavily reliant upon vowel pointings. And it's surprising how much text you can actually read without having the vowel pointings. But you have to have a knowledge of what vowels are available, what sounds were made in classical Hebrew in order to pronounce it correctly. John?
Maybe you don't want to get into this, but just thinking of the two different alphabets, so they changed their entire alphabet.
Correct.
But yet from the time of Moses or Job or whatever, all the way to the time of the post-exilic prophets, all the grammar is pretty much exactly the same.
It's pretty much the same, yes. The grammar has remained the same. There are some changes, because language changes. Language develops. And we, for example, in the Pentateuch, in Moses' writings, when we have a third feminine singular personal pronoun, what we would translate as she, it is spelled differently than anywhere else in the entire Old Testament. You also have a difference in some of the grammatical entities in the way words are put together in sentences and forms. We have more Aramaic forms in the older Hebrew than we do in the later Hebrew, which is the exact opposite of what the liberals will say. They say it the other way around. But what they've forgotten is that Jacob was an Aramaic speaker, Laban was an Aramaic speaker, Rachel and Leah were Aramaic speakers. Deuteronomy 26 says Jacob was a wandering Aramean, and Aramean is the speaker of Aramaic. And when Laban and Isaac actually made their covenant, their pact with each other, in Genesis chapter 32, excuse me, not Isaac, Jacob, when Jacob and Laban made their covenant together that, you know, the Lord watched between us while we are apart from each other, and they heaped up these piles of stones. And what did Jacob call it? He called it Galeed. Gal means a pile of, and aid means witness, a heap which is a witness. And Laban spoke Aramaic. He called it instead Yegar Shahaduta. Yegar means a pile of something, here of stones, and Shahaduta means witness. We go to the book of Job, which is the oldest book of the Bible, written perhaps as much as 500 years before Moses wrote the Pentateuch. And in, I think it's chapter 16, when Job is talking about his witness in heaven, he uses two different words for witness, parallel to each other in synonymous parallelism. And one word is the Hebrew aid, the other one is the Aramaic shahaduta. And so Aramaic, and remember, that's not a surprise to us, because where did Job live? He lived in Arabia. He lived in the region where Aramaic was the spoken language for centuries before Arabic was adopted. So we can expect to see Aramaic grammar and forms exhibited in the language. Later when we talk about relative pronouns, we'll talk about a form of the relative pronoun that is found in the ancient writings and is rare in the later writings, except on some occasions when there's a purposeful archaizing, making language to look old, just like we would use thee and thou. And older language might use it purposely in certain settings. And so in poetry sometimes that happens. So Solomon uses it in the Song of Solomon, but otherwise it's rarely found. And we find it, for example, in Genesis chapter 6, a different form of the relative pronoun than found anywhere else. So we have different things like that that occur. So there's a development of the language, but basically it's virtually the same grammatically from beginning to end over 1,000 years of biblical written history. Okay? In fact, more than that, it'd be about 1,500 years plus, because you put the book of Job at least by the time of Jacob, 1800 BC, at least. That's the latest date for the book of Job. All right, so the vowels we added later to try to help us understand, but we can see that we can look at an English representation and we can understand what this said because we know the language. So that's what we want to bring you to, a point of knowing the language well enough to do the same thing. Let's go through the vowels. This vowel is called what? Patak. All right, remember to pronounce it patak, not patak. Patak is a modern Hebrew pronunciation that loses the differentiation that is made between the patak and the comets. Okay, so patak is the single line, looks like a hyphen dropped below the letter. And then the second letter, the second vowel is comets. It looks like a little T. It has the ah sound. And this one, comets hey. Comets hey. All right, the hey is silent here, but it's part of the vowel. It lengthens it further. Where comets alone is father, this one is father. Notice how it draws it out longer. It's a longer sound. And then the three little dots is called segol. Segol. It's a eh sound. All right? And then the two dots, tsere. Tsere. By the way, I might just take you back to segol for a minute. Segol is a Hebrew word meaning a cluster of grapes. Doesn't that look like a cluster of grapes down there, those three? That's part of the reason it's called that. But just you can use that figure in your mind to help you distinguish that segol is a cluster of grapes. So the segol is that looks like a cluster of grapes underneath, the two and the one below it. And then the tsere. Tsere is the long E sound, which is A in Hebrew, just like in Spanish. The tsere yod is a longer form of it. All right? And what is this vowel called? Hirek. Hirek, okay? It is sometimes pronounced as the short vowel in bit, the I-class vowel, sometimes like machine. And these we'll have to figure out as we go along. And when you have the Hirek yod, it is always long. It's always the E sound. And then this vowel is called kibbutz. Kibbutz. All right? And this one, shurek. It's the oo sound. This one is called holem. And when we add the wow, it becomes holem wow. They both have the same sound. If there's any distinction, it would be that the O sound is shorter in pronunciation in the first and is longer in the second. And then this is the one that you've been asking about that we'll get to and have a better understanding when we study the syllables and the way syllables are formed. And that's the kametz hatuf, also called the kametz hatof, because sometimes it has the O-class sound of an O, like in God, and sometimes it's an U-class sound that's very similar to the kibbutz. So this, in this place, it's okla. Okla is the way you pronounce this word. The schwa is silent in this case because it closes the syllable, and the syllable is unaccented. Remember, in Hebrew, the accent normally goes on the last syllable unless otherwise indicated. The schwa has two forms. It can be vocal, the sound, or it can be silent. It's silent when it closes a syllable. It's vocal when it opens a syllable. And we'll be distinguishing that as we look at syllables. It is transliterated by a superlinear E. Then the half vowels, the hatef pathic, hatef segol, and hatef kametz, all are transliterated according to their vowel classification, but their sounds are identical to that of the schwa. You cannot distinguish the four half vowels in sound. There's no distinction in sound. Occasionally, we'll slip up and try to make a distinction in some way, like in the name of God, Elohim, but it's Elohim. It's really, it's not really the as in the segol. And it's something that we get in a habit of doing, but it really wouldn't be that way in classical Hebrew. You cannot distinguish these sounds. But we do distinguish them as far as their form and as far as their transliteration, and that has to do with the way the words are formed and made and pronunciations derived. They have to do with what the original form of the word was and the changes it goes through when you put endings on it or prefixes on it. Yes, David?
So when it comes to memorizing vocabulary, will there be any words that are distinguished just by difference in compound schwas, or are they, because I found when I was memorizing vocabulary, it was difficult to remember which one because there's no distinction in sound.
Right, there's no distinction in sound. So it's just a distinction in form. It's significant for you to remember all four of them and to be able to distinguish them as far as their names and the forms, because it becomes important as you're forming words later in following the rules of Hebrew. Okay? Yes?
So we say Adonai, but then that's not right, is it?
No, it's Adonai, actually. It's very short. And this is where we've actually got into a habit of probably pronouncing it more like modern Hebrew. And it's a modern affectation to try to distinguish those sounds, like Adonai Elohim. We have the we have the a. And it probably is not that way. And we use it because it's so common. It's so common. But in the classical situation, as far as we can tell and know, there is no distinction in sound. That the only reason we have hatif vowels, these three vowels, are because the Masoretes determined that it was significant. It was a significant clue to the reader of Hebrew to know what the original vowel was in this situation. And so the hatif pathic is signaling that the original full vowel in this situation of an uninflected form would have been a pathic, as opposed to a kametz or a segol. And so it's a clue that helps us with regard to the word history and the original pronunciation of an uninflected form. Okay? All right? Other questions in that regard? It's a good question. Those are just things we have to get used to in the way the language works. And as you go further in the language, some of these things will begin to make sense. There is what we call a learning lag in languages. That means that the information we take in is not immediately assimilated 100%. We assimilate at different rates. Every one of you is assimilating the information you're receiving at a different rate. That's why there's so much repetition involved in learning a language for the first time. That's why, as we're going through, we present a lot of information in class, and then you read it again as you read the reading assignment, and you find it repeated, and sometimes we give you information 3 or 4 lessons ahead, because it needs that constant repetition, even before you read it, to help you better understand it. Because there's that learning lag we have. Every one of us has it. And so that when you reach the end of a semester of Hebrew, the grade you have in the semester of Hebrew after taking the final exam is not really reflective of the knowledge you have of the language. It is affected by how long or how big your learning lag is. Because up here you have a certain amount of information, but you have not yet assimilated it and understood exactly how it all works. You know that this is a hatapathic, but why in the world would it be necessary to have such a thing that has no distinction of pronunciation? All these things will come later as we come along. And even at the end of the semester, you may have some of these things that we've covered early in the semester that haven't quite kicked in. But believe me, it will. If you stick with it, it will come in. That's why I see a pattern of grades in elementary Hebrew sometimes, of a person that has a very low grade first semester, and second semester is better, and third semester is even better, because he has a large learning lag, and first semesters kicks in as he's starting the second semester. You get to the 3rd or 4th week of second semester, and he says, ah, now I understand what we were told in the 8th week of the first semester, right? That's language learning. That's language learning. If any of you are planning to go into missions, you're going to have to face that in learning a spoken language. You'll have the same difficulty, and suddenly things will kick in. You have to give it time. It has to have time to root and grow and produce. You're also 3 different kinds of learners. And I told you I'd talk to you a little bit about this. There are those of you who are visual learners. You want to see it. You want to read it. Those things that's what you need to do. Others of you are audio learners. You say, well, forget about the book, forget about writing it. I just want to hear it, you know. And some of you are so quick that you hear it and it's gotten, even if you haven't seen it. When we were getting ready to go to Bangladesh as missionaries, and we were homeschooling our 4 children at that time, I had one day when I said, okay, I'm going to do something very different. We need to get these kids outside. We need to do something different. We need to have something very practical, get away from algebra, get away from Latin, get away from science, all these other things. Let's do something very different. So I said, let's go find out about an automobile. So I took them outside after I gave them a lecture inside. I said, now we're going to go out to the automobile. We're going to open the hood. I'm going to show you how to open the hood. And then we're going to take a look at the radiator. We're going to take a look at where the oil is placed to lubricate the engine. We're going to talk about the fan and fan belt. We're going to talk about the air filter. I'm going to show you how to remove an air filter. And then I'm going to show where the spark plugs are and the spark plug wires and all the things that are involved with that. And then I'm going to show you how to change a tire, in case you ever had that problem. This is before any of them were ever a driver. The oldest at that time was 13. So it's still 2 years before he'd start driving. So I gave the lecture inside. I went outside and I said, now, which of you remembers what we are doing and how to do it? Because I described everything inside. My older son stepped forward and immediately opened the hood with no problem, went directly to all the different parts and everything, because he is an audio learner. He did not need to see it. But our younger son is a visual learner. He said, I wouldn't have been able to do it, Dad, but now that Nate's done it, I can see it, you know. I have to be shown. I have to see it. Our older daughter, still wasn't getting it. She had heard it. We went outside. She saw her older brother go to it. She saw her younger brother go through the same process. But when I asked her to do something, she said, Dad, I don't remember. So I took her hands and put her hands on the wing nut on the air filter cover and said, Debbie, this is the air filter, and you turn the wing nut this way and open it. And once she had done it, she could do it again. She was a kinesthetic learner. The same with changing a tire. I described how to change a tire. They went out. Our older son could change it with just hearing the instructions before. He remembered and could do it. Younger son had to watch the older brother do it. Our older daughter had to actually do it. Again, I had to take her hands and show her exactly how to do the things, how to place the jack, what to do with the jack, how to get it to go up, how to get it to come down, how to put the lug wrench on, which end of the lug wrench, because I had a 4-part one, which end of that to put in there and how do I know that, all those things. Then what do you do if the lug nut is too tight? She had to actually do those things before she could understand them, kinesthetic learning. Now, if you're a kinesthetic learner for Hebrew, you've got to work extra hard. You've got to make your own flashcards for study. Don't rely on a computer. Don't rely upon things that are already made for you. You need to be involved in hands-on work that will help to cement that in. You need to write out, you need to create and make your own flashcards. You need to create games for yourself. You need to post Post-it notes all over your mirror at home, so that when you're shaving and brushing your teeth, you've got them there to pronounce. And you've got to start thinking about different things that are going on. You've got to think when the sun rises up, you say, Boker Tov, good morning. That when the sun goes down, you say, Boker Erev. And you've got to do it. You've got to practice it with your children. You've got to try to teach your children. Because by the doing of it, you're going to learn and maintain the language. And we'll have exercises in class when we get to that level of comprehension of what is said, where, like with prepositions, I'll have you putting your hands over the table, under the table, beside the table, etc., in order for you to better understand. And the kinesthetic learners are going to gain from that more than anyone else. So learn what kind of learner you are. It will help you in learning languages. It will help you learning many things. It will help you make up. You're not deficient in learning. You learn by a different method. You can learn just as well, just as accurately. You just have to find out. I'm a visual learner. That's why I make all kinds of charts. I draw pictures. I use illustrations, even on my PowerPoints when I'm teaching Sunday school. It's not so much for the class as for myself. But I've learned that if I need to do it for myself, there's other visual learners that need the same thing. For you kinesthetic learners, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to bring in my Hebrew Scrabble board. All right? We've got all kinds of things. That's why we have songs. Songs is another way to do language. We have the alphabet song for kinesthetic learners. Audio learners really benefit from that, but so do kinesthetic learners. So find out what kind of learner you are and look for that. But anyway, all that just to say, don't be concerned if some things just don't seem to quite click yet. This is only the second week that we're closing. And most of you are still in last week. All right? You're still with the alphabet, and the vowels this week are just extra stuff that you're trying to figure out. Now, why do I have to have these? What do I do with them? All of those things, it will all come to pass, and it will fall in place eventually as we go through. Now, let's talk about the vocal schwa, the vocal schwa. When you have a schwa, that 2 dots, under a letter, beginning a syllable or beginning a word, it is vocal. Now, in your textbook, all of this is explained to you starting on page 37, I believe it is. It's chapter 4. It's your reading for next Tuesday, I believe. And I want to go over this ahead of time with you, and I want you to then reinforce it by reading it on schedule. But the schwa then is vocal in this case. And this is where we can also show a difference between modern Hebrew and classical Hebrew. Classical Hebrew says shamor, shamor. That means to keep, preserve. It's an imperative. Shamor, keep. All right? Shamor. But modern Hebrew says shmor, shmor. The schwa is totally silent in modern Hebrew. Now, with the passage of time, you'll understand why this is important for classical Hebrew. But for the time being, just learn that if the schwa begins a word or begins a syllable, it is vocal, it's that sound. Following full letter vowels, it is vocal, because full letter vowels are so long that they keep their syllable open. So shomrim. In modern Hebrew, shomrim. It's actually two syllables, sho, and then mrim. It's not shom. It's not a closed syllable. Closed syllable is where a consonant closes the syllable, finishes the syllable. This isn't shom, because that holem wow is a full letter vowel and cannot reside in a closed syllable. Okay? So there it's vocal, and it's sho marim. Very short. Sho marim. Sho marim. And then back to back in the middle of a word, the first schwa, because you cannot have two silent schwas back to back. And you cannot have two vocal schwas back to back. So the first one is silent, closing the first syllable, yish, yish. And the second one is vocal, opening the next syllable, yish, maru. Yish, maru. Everyone pronounce it with me. Yish, maru. Okay? Yish, maru. All right? And when you have a doubling dogish, you have the same situation you had in the previous one, except it isn't written out for you. It's written shorthand. We know that's a doubling dogish because the letter, what letter is this? Tate is not a Bagad Kafath letter. It's not a Bagad Kafath letter, so the dogish doubles it. So there are two tates. So it's kit, talu. Kit, talu. Everyone? Kit, talu. So you have a doubling dogish. That means it, in essence, has two taiths that are pronounced. And the first taith has, as it were, a silent schwa that's understood. And the second taith has, as it were, a vocal schwa understood. In other words, it is the same situation we had here. But it's not all written out for us. It's written shorthand. Okay? Yes, John?
The dot that looks like a dogish, that's actually a schwa.
No, the dot is a dogish. The two dots below are the schwa. The two dots below are the schwa. The dot in the bosom of the letter is the dogish lene, the dogish. Okay? Jeremiah?
In the back-to-back ones, why is the first one even there?
Why is the first one even there? Because the Masoretes, starting 500 AD, determined that in the written form of vocalizing the language and representing the spoken pronunciation, that every consonant must have a vowel under it. So it's a Masoretic rule. It's an artificial rule. It's an artificial rule. In our transliterating of it, though, we will not put the transliteration there because it's silent. Okay? But it is artificial. And this is part of the artificiality of the Masoretic pointing of the Hebrew. They tried to come up with a system of rules by which they could visually represent how the language is being vocally pronounced. And in coming up with these rules, they end up with some rules that don't make a whole lot of sense. They end up with some rules that seem inconsistent, but they tried to be consistent all the way through, and a rule like this, you'd think they could just leave it out, but they put it in. And therefore, that creates a job for you to learn what has happened here. And so when you see the schwa, you have to ask the question, which did they intend, the silent or the vocal? And the surroundings of it, the syllables that you create from it, is how you determine it. Okay? If you have a schwa under the first of two identical consonants, and here's where you have another exception, Jeremiah. In front of two identical consonants, the first one, here, you'd say, well, this is going to be then a silent schwa, you think. But because it's followed immediately by another lamed, and notice there's no vowel under it, its vowel is here. So lu is here, but this is going to be vocal. This schwa will be vocal. So it's not hal-lu, it's ha-le-lu. Isn't that what we learn in even our anglicized version of Hebrew when we say hallelujah? You've been speaking Hebrew for a long time. Every time you said amen, every time you said hallelujah, every time you said cherubim or seraphim or cherub or seraph, you've been speaking Hebrew. All right? And this is hallelujah. It's a vocal schwa. It's vocal because it is a schwa preceding, it's under a consonant that is followed by the identical consonant. All right? And that's a rule that is going to be hard to remember from time to time. But give yourself time. 6 weeks from now, as we run into examples, it'll begin to finally click and you say, oh yes, that's what we were told. And after so many usages, it finally becomes natural and understandable. So those are situations in which the schwa is vocal, that sound. All right? The silent schwa, whenever it is under a letter closing a syllable, like yish more, yish more. We know this is a closed syllable because the hirik is not a hirik yod. A hirik yod is a long vowel that must remain open. This is the short vowel, the short hirik, yish more. When it follows an accented syllable, when you have a syllable that is accented, like you have the accent here over the lamed, that's lake na, lake na. Okay, it is a silent schwa when it's placed on an accented syllable. Lake na. No sound for it. As Jeremiah said, it would make a lot of sense to just leave it off. All right? The vowelless final kaf has a schwa in it. It is silent. This is melech. You've heard the Hebrew names Abimelech. You've heard the name Melchizedek. There are many uses of melech in Hebrew. And melech means king. Notice the accents on the first syllable. Notice the accent over that first syllable. Melech is king. That schwa in the kaf sofit is silent. And then when you have them back to back at the end, you violate the two schwas in a row, cannot be silent. This becomes shamert. Shamert. Both are silent. It's an exception to the Masoretic rule, and the exception is because it's at the end. And as we talk about the rules of making syllables, this one will suddenly become evident. When we get to that after the break, we'll come back and we'll take a look at that again, and you'll suddenly have an understanding because of the way syllables are formed, the rules for syllables, which are very different than in English. And then when you have them back-to-back in the middle of the word, the first schwa is silent, the second is vocal, always. And I say always advisedly, remember, because in Hebrew there's always exceptions to rules, including that one. But you would expect it to be yish maru. Yish maru. Okay? The first one is silent. The second one is vocal. As we get started again, let me mention a newspaper article that I found in the the Daily News that was on August the 26th, Saturday, August 26th. And it said, College to Debut Hebrew Program. And it's Valley College in Valley Glen. And the professor there, Zev Garber, age 65, has been teaching Hebrew since 1963. And I was looking at that and thinking about it, and I thought, okay, he has been teaching Hebrew approximately 4 or 5 years longer than I. And one of the things he says here about the language is that it is the core of understanding Judaism. It's the core of understanding the Hebrew Bible. And he talks about how that Hebrew can be difficult to learn because it uses an unfamiliar alphabet, is read from left to right. There are different pronunciations. He talks about that as well. A number of issues here. But the interesting thing about it is his emphasis on the fact that it is of great value to understand Hebrew, because with it you gain a better understanding of not only the Jewish people, but of the Hebrew Bible. And that's one of the reasons why that college is starting a program now for secular students, for the secular university, is because they believe it is a significant, important thing to do. And his goal is that they not only speak modern Hebrew, but they be able to read classical Hebrew, be able to read the Hebrew text. Well, let's talk now about syllabification. How do we form syllables? This is important for us to understand why certain things are done. And by the way, while I'm at it, the assignment sheet has the reading of chapter 3 is what's due Tuesday, and chapter 4 is Thursday. You had no chapter to read for today. I got ahead of myself there. So we're still moving, though, in those chapters in that realm. And the discussion of syllables begins on page 40 of your textbook. It's in chapter 4 that is due on Thursday, a week from now, and gives definitions of syllables and explanation, etc. And when we think of syllables, we think of words like in English we say division. Division. Division has 3 syllables. Division. Now, the di is a short schwa type of pronunciation. It's an unaccented syllable, so it loses its emphasis, and we pronounce it as short, but we in English divide that as a syllable, but not so in Hebrew. Syllables can only be formed with regular vowels, not half vowels. Half vowels cannot form syllables by themselves in Hebrew. You say, well, why? Why can't we just do it like we do in English? Because the rules of Hebrew for both pronunciation and for the way that words change and develop when you add suffixes on them and prefixes on them require that we understand that rule for syllabification that was devised. Actually, it was not devised by the Masoretes. It's the Masoretes figuring out what is the scientific way to describe what happens in the Hebrew language, and then they proposed these rules for syllabification that fit the way the language was conveyed, the way the language is formed, and the way the language is pronounced. The first rule is that only full vowels, not full letter vowels, only full vowels, like comets, patak, segol, kibbutz, shurek, holem, only those vowels can form syllables. Hirik yod, tsere yod, your holem wow, all of those are full vowels. Only full vowels can form syllables. Half vowels cannot form syllables. Half vowels cannot form syllables. No schwa, no chatef can form a syllable. And there'll be one other vowel we'll talk about as well. To form syllables, you begin at the end of the word and work forward in the word. So when you build syllables in Hebrew, you must start at the end of the word. Okay? Don't start at the beginning. You start at the end of the word to find out where the syllables must be divided. So that if we have a word like ele, and there's usually an accent over the top of this, but when you pronounce that, we have a doubling dagish, because the lamed is not a bagad kafaf letter. So how do we form syllables? We begin at the end of the word. We find the first full vowel, and the first full vowel starting at the end of the word is what? Segol. Segol. And we divide there. Since the lamed is doubled, then you divide through the lamed, and you become, and you have to remember to watch out for half vowels and doubling dagishes as you go through this. But that's the key, is the center there, that doubling dagish, so that we divide it as though it were this way. This is the syllabification. Okay? It's el, le. Okay? Let's take another word. We begin at the end. What's the first full vowel from the end? Holem wow. What's the next full vowel from the end? The holem. So how many full vowels do we have in this word? That's all the syllables we can have then. So then we have to ask, then what do we do with the schwa? The schwa is the problem here. So we have to determine, is this schwa vocal or silent? If it's vocal, it goes with the following syllable. It begins the following syllable. If it's silent, it closes the preceding syllable. You have a holum wow, would indicate that it's long, and therefore it cannot normally be closed, except here it's closed because it's at the end of the word. This holum stays open because here it's treated as a long vowel. How do you learn that? How do you get that straight? You have to just learn how the language is pronounced. This is never toldot, it's toledot. Toledot pronunciation. So here it's the vocabulary you learn that's going to help you remember, because the holum by itself can be short as well as long. It depends on the word form itself. On the word form itself. And it'd be too long an explanation to go back to the ancient languages in Akkadian and describe why this came to be this way, but believe me, this is a vocal schwa, and so this holum is treated as open, not closed. So strike everything else I said, keep this in mind. So since it's treated as open, then to, and then the lamed with the schwa is a vocal schwa because it begins the following syllable rather than closing the previous one. John?
So we wouldn't be able to figure that out.
Unless you know the vocabulary and have memorized its pronunciation, number one.
So does the schwa make the holum what it is, or does the holum make the schwa what it is?
The use of the, well, that's a good question. You know how a Hebrew would answer you? Because I've had them do this with me. They would say, that's just the way it is. Why do we pronounce it that way? We don't know. But that's just the way it is. And perhaps they're right on that. But there is an explanation on the way the word was formed originally in the past that would explain. But that's not what we want to go through here. So this is an example where it's one you just have to know the vocabulary and its pronunciation. And trust that. All right? Now, how many of you recognize this word? Try to pronounce it. Chad, can you pronounce it?
No, sir.
How about you, Kyle?
No.
All right. Kempis? Remember the yod is a Y sound. Patak, a. So the first is ya. Yaakov. Right. Yaakov. Jacob. It's the Hebrew for Jacob. Yaakov. All right? Now when you pronounce that, notice you have the in there. Yaakov. Because it is a compound schwa. All right? So how do we divide this? Well, start at the end of the word. What's the first full vowel? Holum. What's the next full vowel? The pathak. The pathak, okay? So that you have how many syllables then? 2, because you have only 2 full vowels. How do you divide it? Well, you have to divide it then because you have a vocal schwa. Compound schwas are always vocal. So vocal schwas begin a syllable. So ekov is the first syllable and ya is the second syllable. Okay, vocal schwas always open, they don't close. You won't find vocal schwas at the end of a syllable. They're at the beginnings of syllables. Okay, let's take another example. Where is the first full vowel? The shurik. Where's the second full vowel? That's not a holum. That's the dot over the left horn for a scene. And you know it's not a holum because it already has a vowel underneath it. Notice, it has a schwa underneath. All right? Now, if there were no vowel underneath the scene, then the dot can do double duty. It can be both a holum and the dot for the scene. Remember the Hebrew rule? Every consonant must have a vowel, with the exception of final consonants. Okay, we saw that in Yaakov, Toledot, all right? The final hey in Ele is a silent hey. It's a segol hey type vowel. All right, so we have a schwa there, so the dot over the scene is not a holum, it's just the dot over the scene. So what's the first full vowel after the shurik? Hirik. Hirik. The hirik under the yod.
On that yod, is that a shurik? What's that dot on the yod?
The dot on the yod, inside the yod, that's the doubling dogish.
Oh, dogish. I was thinking it was another shurik.
No, doubling dogish. Mm-hmm. All right. And then what's the next full vowel? Patak. Okay, everyone patak. Everyone say patak. All right. So then as we look at this, we're going to have 3 syllables. 3 syllables. Now we know if we have 2 schwas together in the middle of the word, the first schwa is silent, so it closes a syllable. The second schwa is vocal, so it opens a syllable. So we're going to divide between the 2 schwas. So as we look at this, the first syllable is na'u. The second syllable is yish. The third syllable is way. And it's a silent schwa. And it's pronounced way because a pathic followed by a yod, even when the yod is normally used as a consonant, is pronounced I. So this is why yish, why yis, excuse me, why yis na'u. Why yis na'u. Everyone? Why yis na'u. Again. Why yis na'u. Okay? Now, you have a vertical line here. That vertical line is representing an accent. It's called a secondary accent. And here it is utilized to demonstrate that this pathic syllable is considered an open syllable. In other words, it has only a vowel sound. It's not way, trying to put a y in there. It's y, just like you'd pronounce y, the letter y. Okay? It's y yisnu. And it is a secondary accent. It's like when you have multiple accents in an English word. You have one that has a light accent, syllables no accent, and then you have a syllable with a major accent. This is a secondary accent. So it's wayisna'u. The accent is still, the primary accent is still at the end. Wayisna'u. Okay? So that's how you divide the syllables. Jeremiah?
The dogish forte doesn't double the vowel.
It does not double the vowel in this case.
But it does in others.
Because of the yod. Yes, it does in others. All right, you have to watch that very carefully. Now, in most cases, though, a doubled consonant, like this one up here, silent schwa. Silent schwa. And in fact, you asked the question, does it double the vowel? It only doubles the vowel if it's a schwa. It cannot double any other vowel. It doubles the consonant. In doubling the consonant, the first consonant always has a silent schwa. So, in clarification, it never doubles the hirik. It doesn't double the segol. It doubles the consonant. Doubles the consonant. And provides us with a silent schwa. So, wayisna'u. All right? Kelly?
Sorry, maybe it's just my eyes, but by the pathic, it looks like it's just a straight up line.
That's a straight up and down line. It's an accent.
Oh, that's an
It's a secondary accent.
Okay.
Okay?
It looked like a subscript, like wow, or a subscript
No.
noon or something.
No, it's just an accent. We'll get used to accents later. I've left very few of them in, but secondary accents I try to leave in so you can get used to them. Okay? Yes, David.
When you in that broken up syllabification of that last word under the yod in the first syllable, what is that? There's a it looks like this.
You have the schwa, 2 dots, and then you have the secondary accent that goes with the pathic. Okay? All right? Other questions? Good questions. Please ask these because I want to make certain everything's clear. All right? And even though this is being taped and recorded, remember those who hear this or watch this are going to have some of the same questions. They learn from your questions. They do not have me present to answer them, so your questions help them to find the answer to the questions they have, but they don't have someone to ask. So please feel free to do this. Now, the next one, we begin again at the end of the word, right? What's the first full vowel? The holum. What's the second full vowel? Hirek. So we're going to have how many syllables? 2. So again, here we have 2 schwas to watch out for, but they're both going to be silent. Timlok. How do we know it in this case? Because this happens to be a verb, and the tau is a verb prefix, and therefore we know that it's going to be a silent schwa here. Okay? How many full vowels are in this word? It's the word meaning dream, halom. Only 1. Only 1 full vowel. Remember, the hatif sagol is a half vowel. Therefore, how many syllables are there? Only 1 syllable. There is no division. This is a 1-syllable word. Where's the first full vowel? The comets in the kaf sofit. Where's the next full vowel? Comets under the lamed. Where's the next full vowel? The segol under the aleph. How many syllables will we have? 3, because we have 3 full vowels. Where do we put half vowels? If they're vocal, they go where? At the beginning of a syllable. If they're silent, they go where? At the end. In looking at this word, we have 3 situations of half vowels. A schwa that begins a word is what? Vocal or silent? Vocal. So the first schwa can't form a syllable by itself. It's got to be vocal. All right? The second schwa can be either vocal or silent. We're going to take it as silent because the segol is a short vowel as opposed to a long vowel. The long vowel is seire. And the hatif pathak is what? Always vocal. Compound schwas are always vocal. So it will go with what follows it. So we divide it. Chaka is 1 syllable. La is a syllable. Wa'esh is a syllable. Okay? That syllable has 3 vowel pointings. The first schwa is vocal, but cannot form a vowel by itself. The second schwa is silent. It closes the syllable. We still have only 1 full vowel, and so wa'esh is 1 syllable. Wa'esh la cheka. Everyone? Wa'esh la cheka. Again. Wa'esh la cheka. All right. We're getting longer here. The test, all right? This time, identify for me where the problems will be. Where are the problems here? The problems aren't ever with the full vowels, right? Because they always form a syllable. The problem is with half vowels, especially if there's a simple schwa. If they're the simple schwa, we have to determine whether they are vocal or silent. So where are the problems here? The schwa under the sheen, the schwa under the lamed. All right? These are the problems. We have 3 half vowels. Che'ot. Che'ot is 1 syllable. Ta is 1 syllable. Lahish is 1 syllable. Okay? Jeremiah?
How do we know that dogish was a lane?
How do we know the dogish here is a lane and not a doubling dogish? First of all, It's a Bagad Kafath letter, so that's the first thing we're going to think of. Is that it is most, in fact, no matter what, whether it's doubling or whether it's not doubling, it's still a dogish lane. It will harden that Bagad Kafath letter. But in some cases, it serves double duty in being both the hardening letter and being the doubling of the letter. All right? And as we look at this particular word, and we're going through it, this happens to be a Hebrew verb, and it's going to be that this is not a doubling dogish. This is not a doubling dogish. And you'll have to wait till later when we talk about the formation of these kinds of verbs to actually see why. But this is a hardening dogish only. So therefore it's not divided to where this has, and also notice that if this is a hardening dogish, you can rule this out one other way, just by the rules of syllabification. If this is a doubling dogish, you would divide it how? It would be a tau with a silent schwa. Can you put a tau with a silent schwa here? No. You can do that at the end of the word. You can't do it in the middle of the word. So it's not going to be lahisht tachot. Tachaot. Okay? So you can rule that out that way. But it is easier to see if you come from it from the angle of the form of the Hebrew verb. So we have lahish tachaot. All right? Now, let's get that out of the way, and let's try something very, very different. Isaiah 6:3. You can read Hebrew. You may not understand it, you can read it. All right? Think about the first word. Remember, Hebrew reads right to left. Dennis, pronounce the first word for us. Say that again.
Kadosh.
Okay, now what's the first vowel in that word?
Comet.
Okay, comets has what sound? Ah, as in the English word? Father. Now pronounce it. Right. Make sure you get that ah in there very clearly. Don't shorten it, because it sounded like you were making a short half vowel, like kadosh. It's kadosh. Okay, everyone? Kadosh. Again, kadosh. What's the second word, Scott Jackson?
Kadosh.
Right. What's the third word, Henry?
Kadosh.
Or Kenny, not Henry. Kenny. Kadosh. So we have it 3 times in a row, right? Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. From studying the vocabulary for the quiz for Tuesday morning, what does kadosh mean? Holy. Holy. So what are we saying? Holy. In Hebrew, that's not indicating a trinity in the Godhead. That's a false argumentation. If you're going to do that, then you're going to have 3 planets, planet Earths. When Jeremiah says, "Oh, earth, earth, earth." All right? Eretz, eretz, eretz. Or you have to have 3 overturnings and destructions when Isaiah says, "I will overturn, overturn, overturn." Triplets are used in Hebrew for emphasis. All right? This means that God is supremely holy, most holy. We talk about the Holy of Holies. This is the Holy of Holy of Holies. All right? He is the holiest of all. It has nothing to do with Trinity whatsoever. Hebrew grammar and syntax just talks about his supreme holiness. He is most holy. All right? Now, the real tricky one. We come to the 4th word, the one in the 2nd line. All right? Michael, how would you pronounce this word? No. You got part of it. You started there. How about coming over here to Eric?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. You do not pronounce the vowels that are there. Those vowels are artificially there. They are artificially to remind you that for the Hebrew reader, for the modern Hebrew reader, for the Jewish reader, that in their practice normally This would be pronounced with Adonai, Lord. And so they take the half vowel under the aleph in Adonai, represented here because it's under a yod, which doesn't require a compound schwa, and they make it a simple schwa. And the nai ending is a comet's ending under the noon of Adonai. And so it's merely there as a device to say to them, don't pronounce the tetragrammaton. All right? Now we'll talk more about that later on, but that's a false concept created by heretical Jews in Alexandria, Egypt, 250 years before Christ, with a misinterpretation of the third commandment. And you can find that out by reading the Jewish Encyclopedia, which will tell you that. And will tell you that it was actually pronounced before. And you can talk to Orthodox Jewish rabbis today, and they will tell you that in their discussions and their reading of Scripture among themselves for a holy purpose and in a spiritual study of the Word, they will pronounce the title Yahweh. All right? You pronounce it Yahweh as you read it. Okay, Tom?
Why is it way at the end if that's a hey?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Would it be Yah?
First of all, the Yah, you have a comet's hey. The hey is a silent vowel letter. It's not Yahweh. Don't cut it off that way. That's a affectation of actually Gentile speakers that you don't hear in Hebrew speakers. It's Yah, not Yah. All right? And it's way because the wow, and then you have in the Hebrew, it would actually be a segol hey. A segol hey. And the segol hey is pronounced like a tsere. Okay? Both heys are silent. Yahweh. Okay? All right? So pronounce that Yahweh. Don't pronounce the vowels that are there. This is something you just have to learn. All right? Special pointing. Now, yeah, Scott?
Is that just for that word? Because it's the name
Just for that word.
Because it's the name of God.
That's right. That's the only reason, and it's the only word.
We're not following that phonetically. We just need to know that.
You just need to know it.
Okay.
Correct. Ignore the vowels. Okay? All right? Then the last word, it'd be pronounced how, Jeff? Who doesn't have the broken collarbone? Tse, tse. Notice the vocal schwa. Tse, tsevaot. Okay? Tsevaot. Everyone? Tsevaot. So we have Yahweh, Tsevaot. What's Tsevaot mean from your vocabulary? Armies or hosts. Hosts is the old-fashioned translation. So it's saying holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of the armies. All right? You're reading Scripture now. Fourth class in Hebrew, you're reading Scripture. So while we're on a roll, let's do another one. All right? Greg, pronounce the first word for me. Okay, remember the schwa at the beginning vocal is B. Okay? B. What's the next vowel? The two dots side by side? Tsere. Ba-re. Hirek. E. Okay. Bereshit. Bereshit. Everyone? Bereshit. All right. The next word, Gus. Okay, now get all the ah in there, okay? Bara. Okay? Bara. Everyone? Bara. The aleph is silent. Okay? The next word begins with a compound schwa, which will be like a vocal schwa. Let's see here. Jeremiah. Okay, now, notice he used the as in segol, because hatef segol. In your textbook, you're told that the compound schwas, the schwa itself is not pronounced. Instead, you pronounce the vowel that is with it. formed with it. That is for modern pronunciation and for the purpose of pedagogical learning, to try to distinguish so that you see these things. But in actuality, in the ancient Hebrew, it was all pronounced the same. It was always the So we've learned to say Elohim. Okay, Elohim. It would be actually Elohim. Be barely there with the first part of it, Elohim. All right? Now, the last line. Kelly, the first word? Not it's not segol. It's not the grape cluster. It's 2 dots.
Oh, 8.
8. Yes, 8. It's the tsele. Okay? John Melkon, how about the next word?
Hashamayim.
Okay, remember the pathak? Shamayim. And notice the doubling dogish in the sheen. Shamayim. Okay, everyone? Shamayim. Modern Hebrew says Hashamayim. All right, we're pronouncing it as biblical Hebrew. The next one is Wa'et. And the last one is what? James Lee.
Ritz.
Okay, haaretz. Haaretz. Okay, let's read it all together from start to finish. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim wa'et haaretz. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So you can read Scripture now. You should be able to pick up any part of the Hebrew Bible and now read it, because you have the consonants, their sounds, and the vowels and their sounds. Start practicing that immediately with everything you see in Hebrew.